The stars looked peaceful from the bridge of the New Horizon. But Captain Jake Morrison knew that peace could change in a heartbeat. Space was full of dangers, and his crew had learned that lesson many times during their 3-year mission to explore the outer edges of human territory. The ship moved slowly through the void between star systems, carrying 47 souls who had volunteered to push the boundaries of what humanity knew about the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Carter stood beside Jake, looking at the sensor readings on the main screen. She was the ship's expert on alien life and had spent most of her career hoping to make first contact with another intelligent species. Her dream was about to come true, but not in the way she had imagined. The sensors showed something massive, approaching from the direction of a nearby star system. "Captain, we have multiple contacts moving toward us at high speed," called out Lieutenant Ben Rodriguez from his position at the security station. He was a former Marine who had joined the exploration service to see new worlds, but kept his warrior instincts sharp. His hands moved to the weapon controls even though the New Horizon was built for science, not war. The main screen flickered and showed a fleet of ships unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were sleek and dark with strange symbols carved into their hulls. The largest ship was easily 10 times the size of the New Horizon and bristled with weapons that glowed with alien energy. Smaller ships surrounded it like hungry sharks circling their prey. "Try to establish communication," Jake ordered, but his voice carried the tension that every member of his crew felt. This was the moment that would change human history forever. They were no longer alone in the universe, but these newcomers did not look friendly. Lisa worked frantically at her console, trying to send peaceful greetings in every format she could think of, mathematical sequences that showed intelligence, music that demonstrated culture, and simple pictures that might bridge the gap between species. The alien fleet continued to approach without responding to any of her attempts on the flagship of the alien fleet. War Commander Vexithul studied the primitive vessel that had wandered into his territory. His species called themselves the Zephyrians, and they had conquered 7 different worlds in the past century. Each new species they encountered was weaker than the last, and this one looked like it would be the easiest prey, yet the creature standing beside him analyzed the scans of the human ship and its occupants. The beings inside were soft and pink, with no natural armor or claws. They moved slowly and seemed to lack any real weapons. Their ship was barely armed and would not last 5 minutes against Zephyrian technology. "Commander, these beings appear to be Category 5 prey." The analyst reported with contempt in his voice. Category 5 was the lowest rating in Zephyrian military classification, reserved for species so weak they offered no resistance at all. "They will make good slaves for the mining operations." Vexithul nodded and gave the order to capture the human ship. He wanted to study these creatures before launching a full invasion of their home world. The scans had already revealed the location of Earth and its colonies. Soon, the Zephyrian Empire would expand by another star system. The attack came without warning, as Zephyrian fighters swarmed around the New Horizon like angry insects. Their weapons struck the human ship's shields, and Jake knew they had only minutes before the defenses failed completely. He grabbed the emergency communicator and tried to send a warning back to Earth, but the aliens were jamming all frequencies. "Prepare for boarding," Ben shouted as he armed every crew member with the few weapons they carried. The New Horizon was an exploration vessel, not a warship, but every human on board was ready to fight for their lives. They had no idea that their actions would shock an empire that had never faced real resistance. The Zephyrian boarding pod slammed into the ship's hull, and alien warriors poured through the breaches. They expected to find cowering prey, but instead met fierce resistance from humans who refused to surrender. Ben led the defense with desperate courage as his people fought with tools and improvised weapons against advanced alien technology. Lisa found herself trapped in the laboratory section. As Zephyrian soldiers advanced down the corridor, she grabbed a plasma cutter used for rock samples and turned it into a weapon. The aliens had never seen prey fight back with such determination, and several fell before they could adapt to human tactics. The battle raged through the ship's corridors as humans fought like cornered animals. They used their knowledge of the ship's layout to set traps and ambushes that caught the Zephyrians off guard. Every deck became a battlefield where supposedly weak prey turned into dangerous predators. Jake made his last stand on the bridge as enemy soldiers surrounded him. He destroyed the navigation computer to prevent the aliens from learning about human defenses and fought until a Zephyrian stun weapon finally brought him down. The last thing he saw was Ben being overwhelmed by superior numbers after taking down 6 alien warriors. When the fighting ended, the Zephyrians had won, but at a cost that shocked them. 23 of their elite soldiers were dead or wounded fighting creatures they had classified as harmless. War Commander Vex Thule stood among the human prisoners trying to understand how such weak beings had fought so effectively. The surviving humans were dragged to the Zephyrian flagship as prisoners, but their resistance had already planted seeds of doubt in alien minds. No prey species had ever fought back like this, and some Zephyrian officers began to wonder if their intelligence about humans was wrong. Lisa looked around at her captured crewmates and saw something in their eyes that the aliens could not understand. They had lost this battle, but the war was just beginning and humanity would not go quietly into slavery. The Zephyrians thought they had found easy prey, but they were about to learn that humans were the most dangerous species they had ever encountered. 6 months had passed since the New Horizon disappeared, and War Commander Vex Thule felt confident as his fleet approached the first human colony. The prisoners from the exploration ship had provided useful information about human settlements. And their pathetic defenses. New Melbourne was a mining colony on the edge of human space with only 50,000 inhabitants and minimal military protection. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster stood on the observation deck of the colony's command center, watching the approaching alien fleet through her binoculars. She had been born on New Melbourne and spent her entire military career protecting mining operations from pirates and smugglers. Nothing in her training had prepared her for an alien invasion, but she was determined to make these creatures pay for every meter of ground they took. The warning had come 3 days ago when a damaged probe from the New Horizon finally reached human space carrying Captain Morrison's desperate message about first contact gone wrong. Amy had used those 3 days to turn her peaceful mining colony into a fortress, using every resource at her disposal. The miners were not soldiers, but they knew how to use explosives and heavy equipment. Mining foreman Pete Johnson gathered his crew around the massive ore processors that dominated the colony's industrial sector. These machines could tear through solid rock, and with some modifications, they would make excellent weapons against alien invaders. His people had spent the last 72 hours welding armor plates and mounting the processors on mobile platforms. "Remember, boys, these aliens think we're easy targets," Pete told his workers as they prepared their improvised war machines. "Let's show them what happens when you mess with miners who've been blasting rock for 20 years. Dr. Helen Murphy worked frantically in her laboratory, converting medical supplies into explosive devices while her assistant, Sarah Williams, rigged motion sensors throughout the colony's underground tunnels. They had no military training, but years of working with dangerous chemicals had taught them how to create devastating surprises for unwelcome visitors. The Zephyrian fleet entered orbit around New Melbourne, expecting another easy conquest, like the dozens they had achieved before. War Commander Vex Thule looked down at the small human settlement and saw primitive buildings surrounded by mining equipment. His tactical computers calculated that his forces would control the colony within 6 hours. The first Zephyrian shuttles landed in the colony's main plaza carrying 200 elite warriors who had conquered worlds across 3 star systems. They advanced in perfect formation toward the command center, expecting the humans to surrender immediately. Instead, they walked into a carefully prepared killing zone. Amy triggered the first trap when the aliens reached the center of the plaza, and mining charges buried beneath the pavement exploded with devastating force. The Zephyrians had never encountered enemies who used their own environment as a weapon, and dozens of warriors disappeared in clouds of rock and metal, Pete's mobile. Or processors emerged from concealed positions around the plaza like mechanical monsters. Their grinding wheels and crushing jaws tore through Zephyrian armor, while the miners operating them whooped with savage joy. These humans fought with an enthusiasm that horrified the alien invaders who were used to facing terrified prey. The battle spread throughout the colony as more Zephyrian forces landed, only to face resistance from every building and tunnel. Colonist Jane Davis led a group of administrative workers armed with mining tools and improvised weapons. They had no combat experience, but they knew every inch of their home and used that knowledge to deadly advantage in the underground tunnels. Dr. Murphy's explosive traps claimed dozens of Zephyrian soldiers who tried to advance through what they thought were safe passages. The aliens had sophisticated sensors, but they could not detect chemicals that humans had disguised as ordinary mining supplies. Every step became a potential death trap. Maintenance worker Carl Brown had rigged the colony's power grid to overload on command, and when Zephyrian forces tried to capture the main generator, he turned their victory into disaster. The explosion took out an entire city block and showed the aliens that humans would destroy their own homes rather than surrender them intact. The fighting raged for 18 hours as Zephyrian reinforcements poured down from orbit, only to be met by increasingly desperate and creative human resistance. Colonists used industrial equipment as weapons and turned everyday items into deadly surprises. Children who should have been evacuated instead carried ammunition to fighters and served as scouts. Amy made her final stand in the command center. Surrounded by a dozen volunteers, including school teacher Linda Clark and retired engineer Bob Adams, they had jury-rigged the building's security system to electrify the walls and filled the corridors with homemade gas bombs. Every Zephyrian who entered faced a gauntlet of death. When the aliens finally broke through, Amy triggered the command center's self-destruct system rather than let them capture the colony's communication equipment. Her last transmission reached Earth, carrying tactical information about Zephyrian weapons and strategies that would prove invaluable in the coming war. The Zephyrians eventually overwhelmed New Melbourne through sheer numbers, but War Commander Vexathul looked at his casualty. Reports with growing unease. He had lost over 300 elite warriors conquering a single small colony. No prey species had ever inflicted such losses on his forces. On Earth, Admiral Greg Sullivan received Amy's final transmission and immediately began mobilizing every military unit in the solar system. The aliens had made a fatal mistake by giving humanity time to prepare, and now the real war would begin. Earth's industries shifted to military production, while recruitment centers overflowed with volunteers. Dr. Lisa Carter watched the battle's aftermath from her cell on the Zephyrian flagship and saw something in the alien crew that had not been there before. Fear was creeping into their eyes as they realized that humans were not the helpless prey they had expected. The resistance at New Melbourne had shaken their confidence. War Commander Vexthul ordered his fleet toward the next human colony, but his officers no longer spoke with the same arrogance they had shown before. The humans had proven they would fight to the death for their homes, and the Zephyrians were beginning to understand that this invasion would cost them far more than they had ever imagined. The news from New Melbourne reached Earth like a thunderclap, and within hours, every human world was preparing for war. Engineer Commander Nick Parker stood in the main assembly hall of Luna Station, watching thousands of workers convert civilian manufacturing plants into weapons factories. Humanity had 3 weeks before the alien fleet reached the inner colonies, and Nick intended to use every second. His team worked around the clock, modifying mining lasers into ship-mounted weapons, while production lines that once built farming equipment now churned out armor plating and missile systems. The human capacity for rapid adaptation amazed even Nick as he watched welders and factory workers become weapons designers overnight. On Mars, Colony Director Kate Williams received the evacuation orders, but she had other plans for the Red Planet. Instead of running, she gathered her best engineers and began converting the massive terraforming equipment into planetary defense systems. The atmospheric processors that were meant to make Mars livable would instead make it deadly for any alien invaders. The mining operation on Mars employed thousands of workers who operated equipment capable of moving mountains, and Kate saw no reason why that same equipment could not move alien ships out of existence. Drill operator Mike Stevens led a crew that converted the massive bore drills into railgun systems that could punch holes through Starship Hull's squadron leader Ryan Mitchell, gathered every pilot on Mars and began training them to fight in space using converted cargo haulers and passenger shuttles. These civilian spacecraft were never designed for combat, but human engineers quickly added weapons and armor, while pilots learned to use unconventional tactics that no military academy had ever taught. The Zephyrian fleet approached Mars expecting to find another lightly defended colony like New Melbourne, but instead they encountered a planet that had been transformed into a fortress. War Commander Vexthul looked at his sensors with growing confusion as they detected weapons signatures that should not exist on a mining world. Kate stood in the command center deep beneath Mars' surface, watching the alien fleet deploy for what they thought would be an easy victory. She had turned the planet's low gravity into an advantage by launching swarms of small drones that could maneuver in ways impossible on Earth. Each drone carried enough explosives to cripple a Zephyrian fighter. The battle began when the aliens sent their first wave of assault ships toward the main colony domes, but Ryan led his makeshift squadron in a coordinated strike that caught the Zephyrians completely off guard. Human pilots used the asteroid field around Mars as cover while striking with hit-and-run tactics that confused the alien commander's mining engineer, Sandra Walsh, had rigged the planet's orbital processing stations to overload, and when Zephyrian capital ships moved into bombardment range, she turned the stations into massive bombs. The explosions lit up space like new stars and showed the aliens that humans could turn any piece of equipment into a weapon. On the planet's surface, foreman Tony Garcia led teams of miners who had converted their excavation equipment into anti-aircraft guns. When Zephyrian dropships tried to land, they met concentrated fire from weapons that could crack open asteroids. The aliens found themselves fighting an entire planet that had been weaponized. The human defenders used Mars' unique environment to their advantage as battles raged in the low gravity of the mining tunnels. Human workers who had spent years moving in reduced gravity could outmaneuver Zephyrian soldiers who struggled with the unfamiliar conditions. Every tunnel became a death trap engineer. Lisa Hayes had modified the planet's communication array to jam Zephyrian frequencies while broadcasting human tactical data across multiple channels. The aliens discovered that their supposedly primitive enemies could wage electronic warfare as effectively as any advanced civilization. The fighting continued for 6 days as wave after wave of Zephyrian forces crashed against human defenses that seemed to grow stronger with each attack. Kate's people had learned to adapt faster than the aliens could develop new tactics. Every setback became a lesson that improved their defensive strategies. Ryan's pilots performed impossible maneuvers in their converted civilian craft, while mining crews used industrial equipment to create obstacles that channeled alien forces into prepared killing zones. The Zephyrians had superior technology, but humans had something more valuable, which was the ability to improvise and innovate under pressure. Dr. Helen Murphy had escaped from New Melbourne before its fall and reached Mars just in time to help with the defense. She worked with Sandra to develop new explosive compounds using materials found in the mining operations. Their chemical weapons proved devastatingly effective against Zephyrian armor. War Commander Vexthul watched his casualties mount with growing alarm, as human resistance proved far more effective than anything his forces had encountered before. These creatures fought with a creativity that defied all Zephyrian military doctrine. They turned weakness into strength and defeat into opportunity. The tide turned when Mike's converted drilling platforms achieved orbital range and began picking off Zephyrian ships with precisely aimed shots. The aliens had never faced weapons that could reach them from a planet's surface, and their fleet formation began to break apart under the unexpected assault. Kate coordinated the final phase of the battle as her defenders launched a coordinated strike that combined orbital weapons with fighter squadrons and surface-based missiles. The Zephyrians found themselves caught in a three-dimensional battle that stretched their tactical abilities beyond their limits. When the alien fleet finally retreated from Mars, they left behind nearly half their ships and thousands of dead warriors. War Commander Vex Thul could no longer deny that these humans were unlike any enemy his people had ever faced. They possessed a genius for war that made them far more dangerous than their primitive technology suggested, Dr. Lisa Carter observed. The aftermath from her prison cell and saw fear spreading through the Zephyrian crew like a disease. The proud warriors who had boasted of easy conquest now spoke in whispers about the humans who refused to die. She knew that Mars had changed everything. The victory at Mars gave humanity precious time and confidence as Admiral Sullivan prepared. Earth's defenses, while engineers across the solar system worked to mass-produce the weapons and tactics that had proven effective against alien technology, the hunters were about to become the hunted. The remaining Zephyrian fleet limped toward Earth, carrying the bitter taste of defeat from Mars, while Admiral Greg Sullivan watched their approach from the command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. He had spent 4 months turning humanity's home world into the most heavily defended planet in known space, and now the ultimate test was about to begin. Commander Steve Baker floated in zero gravity aboard the orbital defense platform, Titan watching his crews make final preparations. On the massive railgun arrays that surrounded Earth like a steel necklace, these weapons had been built using technology reverse-engineered from Zephyrian wreckage, and human ingenuity had improved upon the original designs. Colonel Jennifer Adams stood on the observation deck of Defense Station Alpha as her ground-based anti-ship weapons powered up with earth-shaking vibrations. The planet's surface bristled with missile silos and energy cannons that could reach into orbit, while underground bunkers held enough supplies to sustain the fighting for years. War Commander Vex Thul approached Earth expecting to find another lightly defended world, but his sensors detected weapon signatures that made his blood run cold. The humans had somehow transformed their entire planet into a fortress that rivaled anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever built. Their primitive species had learned to fight back. Captain Jake Morrison had escaped during a prisoner transfer gone wrong and now commanded a makeshift fleet of converted civilian vessels that harassed the alien fleet from the outer system. His merchant ships and passenger liners had been fitted with weapons and armor by crews who worked with desperate determination. The space battle began when Zephyrian assault ships entered Earth's defense perimeter and immediately came under fire. From orbital platforms that coordinated their attacks with computer precision, Steve's gunners had trained for months on simulators, and their accuracy shocked the alien commanders who expected human technology to be inferior. Jake led his civilian fleet in attack runs that defied every rule of space combat as cargo haulers, and luxury liners performed maneuvers that military vessels could not match. His pilots had grown up flying in Earth's crowded shipping lanes, and they used that experience to deadly advantage against alien formations on Earth's surface. Major Paul Turner led special operations teams that prepared for ground invasion, while civilians in every city practiced the resistance tactics that had proven effective on Mars and New Melbourne. Humanity had learned that every citizen was a potential soldier, and every building could become a fortress. The Zephyrian bombardment began with energy beams that should have cracked Earth's crust, but instead struck defensive shields that absorbed and redirected the attacks back at the alien fleet. Human engineers had studied captured Zephyrian technology and found ways to turn their own weapons against them. Jennifer's ground-based weapons joined the battle as missile swarms rose from hidden silos to strike at Zephyrian ships that thought they were safely out of range. The aliens discovered that humans had weaponized their entire planet from the ocean floors to the highest mountains. The fighting raged in Earth's orbit as both sides committed everything they had to the ultimate battle, Zephyrian ships that had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves outmatched by human vessels that should have been easy prey. The roles of hunter and hunted had completely reversed. Dr. Lisa Carter finally escaped from Zephyrian custody during the chaos of the space battle and made her way to a human communication station where she transmitted vital intelligence about alien weaknesses and tactical patterns. Her information allowed Earth's defenders to exploit every flaw in Zephyrian strategy. Steve coordinated orbital defense platforms in synchronized attacks that created crossfire patterns the aliens could not escape, while Jake's converted civilian fleet struck from unexpected angles using tactics no military academy had ever taught. Humanity fought with an innovation that constantly surprised their enemies. The first Zephyrian landing attempts met devastating resistance as Paul's special operations teams had prepared every possible landing zone with traps and ambushes. The aliens found that conquering Earth would require fighting for every meter of ground against an enemy that refused to surrender. Civilian engineer Rachel Davis led volunteer teams that maintained the orbital platforms under enemy fire, while her husband Tom organized supply runs that kept the defenders equipped and ready. The entire human population had become part of the war effort in ways the Zephyrians could not comprehend. Underground resistance networks prepared for guerrilla warfare using lessons learned from the outer colonies, while surface defenders turned Earth's diverse environments into advantages. Humans could fight effectively in Arctic conditions that froze Zephyrian equipment and jungle terrain that confused their sensors. The psychological impact on the Zephyrian forces became severe as their proud warriors discovered that humans fought without fear of death and adapted faster than any enemy they had ever faced. The aliens who had built an empire on easy conquest now faced their worst nightmare. War Commander Vex Thule watched his invasion plans crumble as human resistance proved impossible to break. His warriors whispered that these creatures were not prey, but predators disguised in soft flesh. The morale of his forces collapsed as casualties mounted without any hope of victory. The siege of Earth continued for weeks as both sides fought with desperation, but the momentum had shifted permanently in favor of humanity, Admiral Sullivan's defensive strategy was working perfectly, while human innovation continued to produce new weapons and tactics faster than the aliens could adapt. Jake's fleet had grown stronger as more civilian vessels joined the fight and converted merchant ships, began outperforming military craft through superior tactics and crew determination. The Zephyrians faced an enemy that learned from every battle and improved with each engagement as the siege dragged on. War Commander Vex Thule made the decision that would doom his empire when he called for reinforcements from the Zephyrian homeworlds. He could not admit that a species he had classified as harmless prey had defeated his forces, but his pride would cost his people everything. The message traveled across space carrying news that would shock the Zephyrian Empire to its core. Their supposedly invincible military had been stopped by creatures they considered barely intelligent. The humans had proven that underestimating your enemy was the deadliest mistake any warrior could make. The Zephyrian siege of Earth had become a nightmare that War Commander Vexathol could never have imagined, as his once mighty fleet found itself trapped in a system where every asteroid and space station had been turned into a weapon. Captain Jake Morrison led increasingly bold raids against alien supply lines, using tactics that made the Zephyrians fear leaving their heavily defended positions. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Davis had developed new boarding techniques that turned human weakness into strength as her teams used their smaller size and greater agility to infiltrate Zephyrian vessels through maintenance shafts and cargo bays. The aliens had designed their ships to repel attacks from other Zephyrian-sized warriors and never considered enemies who could crawl through spaces too small for their own people. Sergeant First Class Tony Garcia led Marine boarding parties that struck terror into Zephyrian crews who had once considered themselves the galaxy's finest warriors. Humans proved devastatingly effective in close-quarters combat because they fought with a savagery that civilized species had forgotten. Every captured alien ship became a lesson in human determination. the psychological warfare proved as important as the physical battles as Zephyrian morale crumbled under the relentless human attacks. These proud conquerors had built their empire on the assumption that other species would surrender when faced with superior force. But humans seemed to grow stronger when facing impossible odds. Dr. Helen Murphy worked with captured Zephyrian technology to develop new weapons that combined alien science with human innovation, while her research teams found ways to turn enemy equipment against its creators. Every piece of salvaged technology became a building block for more effective human weapons. On Earth's surface, the resistance had grown into a planet-wide network that made life miserable for any Zephyrian forces that managed to land. Former Marine Colonel Chris Thompson led guerrilla units that struck from underground tunnels and abandoned buildings before vanishing into the civilian population. Engineer Sandra Walsh led the reverse engineering effort that rapidly advanced human technology. As her teams learned to not just copy alien designs but improve upon them, within months, human ships began mounting weapons that were superior to anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. The tide of battle shifted dramatically when human forces began capturing intact Zephyrian vessels through boarding actions that the aliens could not defend against. Tony's Marines had perfected techniques for taking control of enemy ships, while Jake's fleet provided covering fire and extraction support. War Commander Vexathol watched his forces dwindle as human attacks became more coordinated and effective with each passing week. His warriors, who had once boasted of easy victories, now huddled in their bunkers, afraid to venture into space where human raiders waited like hungry wolves. The breaking point came when Rachel's boarding teams captured a Zephyrian command ship and brought it back to Earth intact with all its computer systems and tactical databases. Human intelligence officers led by Colonel Mark Thompson extracted information that revealed the locations and strengths of every Zephyrian military installation. Admiral Greg Sullivan used this intelligence to plan counterattacks that struck at the heart of Zephyrian operations, while Jake's expanded fleet began hunting alien ships throughout the solar system. The hunters had indeed become the hunted as human forces took the offensive. Dr. Lisa Carter worked with Sandra's engineering teams to understand Zephyrian psychology and technology while developing new tactics that exploited alien weaknesses. She had spent months as a prisoner observing her captors, and now that knowledge became a weapon against the Empire that had underestimated humanity. The civilian population of Earth had become part of the war machine as factory workers produced weapons and supplies while retired veterans trained new recruits in the art of fighting aliens. Humanity had discovered that total war required total commitment from every person. Lieutenant Bob Adams led fighter squadrons equipped with hybrid human-alien technology that outperformed anything either species had fielded before. His pilots had learned to think like humans while fighting with alien weapons, and the combination proved devastating. The Zephyrian reinforcements finally arrived from their home worlds, expecting to find Vex Thul's forces preparing for the final assault on human civilization. Instead, they discovered a fleet in retreat and an enemy that had grown stronger, with every battle fleet commander Zektar brought the largest military force the Zephyrian Empire had ever assembled. But his confidence evaporated when he saw the tactical reports from the siege. These humans had somehow reversed every advantage the aliens possessed and turned their own strengths against them. Jake coordinated with newly arrived human reinforcements from the outer colonies as mining ships and cargo haulers joined his fleet, bringing industrial equipment that had been converted into weapons. Humanity was mobilizing every resource in their desperate fight for survival. The space battles intensified as both sides committed larger forces, but the pattern remained the same with human innovation and adaptability. Overcoming Zephyrian technology and numbers, every engagement taught the humans new lessons, while the aliens struggled to understand an enemy that defied all their assumptions. Tony's Marine units had perfected their boarding techniques to the point where Zephyrian ships began surrendering rather than face capture. The aliens discovered that human prisoners fought even harder than human attackers, and the psychological impact shattered their confidence. Sandra's reverse engineering program had advanced to the point where human weapons were becoming superior to their alien originals, while Chris's resistance networks had made Earth's surface impossible for the Zephyrians to control. Every human victory made the next victory more likely. The final phase of the siege began when Admiral Sullivan launched coordinated attacks against every Zephyrian position in the solar system, while Jake's fleet struck at their command ships and supply vessels. Humanity had learned to fight as one unified force, while the aliens remained divided by fear. War Commander Vexthul faced the ultimate humiliation when his own officers began suggesting retreat in the face of human pressure. The empire that had conquered the galaxy was being defeated by a species they had dismissed as harmless prey fleet. Commander Zektar realized that the Zephyrian Empire faced its greatest crisis as reports arrived of human attacks spreading beyond Earth's solar system. These creatures had somehow learned to hunt their hunters, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The final battle for Earth's solar system began when Fleet Commander Zektar committed the entire Zephyrian Empire's main battle fleet to what he believed would be the decisive crushing of human resistance. His massive armada contained over 1,000 ships and represented the military might that had conquered half the galaxy. But he was about to learn that numbers meant nothing against an enemy that refused to surrender. Admiral Greg Sullivan stood in the command center watching the approaching alien fleet while coordinating with allies that the Zephyrians never expected to face. Humanity had contacted other species that the Empire had conquered and offered them freedom in exchange for joining the fight against their mutual oppressors. Fleet Captain Alex Turner led a combined force of human ships and liberated alien vessels that had learned to fight using human tactics, while Captain Jake Morrison commanded the largest civilian fleet in history as merchant ships and passenger liners joined military vessels in humanity's desperate gamble. The space battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy's balance of power shifted forever, as human ships demonstrated technology that surpassed anything the Zephyrians possessed. Sandra Walsh's reverse engineering program had produced weapons that combined the best of multiple species with human innovation. War Commander Vexthul watched in horror as his supposedly superior forces were systematically destroyed by enemies he had once dismissed as harmless prey. The humans fought with a coordination and creativity that made his own tactical training seem primitive by comparison. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Davis led boarding parties that captured Zephyrian command ships faster than the aliens could respond, while Sergeant Tony Garcia's Marines turned every captured vessel into a weapon against the Empire that had underestimated humanity's warrior spirit. The turning point came when Jake led a desperate strike directly at Zektar's flagship, using converted civilian ships that the Zephyrians dismissed as insignificant threats. His cargo haulers and passenger liners punched through the alien defensive screen with modifications that turned commercial vessels into ships of war. Dr. Lisa Carter coordinated intelligence operations that allowed human forces to predict and counter every Zephyrian tactical move, while Dr. Helen Murphy's chemical weapons proved devastatingly effective against alien life support systems. The Empire's technological advantages crumbled under human ingenuity. Commander Steve Baker's orbital defense platforms had been modified into mobile weapons that joined the space battle, while Colonel Jennifer Adams led ground-based forces that launched missiles capable of reaching the enemy fleet. Earth had become a weapon that struck at its attackers. The psychological impact on the Zephyrian forces reached a breaking point as their warriors discovered that humans seemed to grow stronger with each battle, while alien morale collapsed under the relentless pressure of fighting an enemy that turned every defeat into a learning experience. Fleet Commander Zektar found himself trapped in a three-dimensional battle that stretched his forces beyond their limits as human ships attacked from directions that defied military logic, while liberated alien vessels struck at targets their former masters never expected them to reach. The climax of the battle occurred when Jake's strike force reached the Zephyrian flagship and Tony's Marines boarded the massive vessel in the largest boarding action in galactic history. The aliens fought desperately to defend their command ship, but human determination proved unstoppable. War Commander Vexathol faced Captain Morrison in personal combat aboard the flagship's bridge and finally understood the true nature of humanity. As Jake fought with a ferocity that came from defending his entire species, the Zephyrian commander realized too late that humans were not prey but the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. The death of Vex Thul and capture of Zektar broke the Zephyrian fleet's will to fight as ship after ship surrendered rather than face the human boarding parties that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. The empire that had seemed invincible was collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. Admiral Sullivan coordinated the final phase of the battle as human forces systematically destroyed or captured every remaining Zephyrian vessel while liberated. Alien species joined the fight against their former oppressors. The galaxy was witnessing the birth of a new alliance built on freedom rather than conquest. The surviving Zephyrian ships fled toward their home worlds, carrying news that would shatter their empire's confidence forever. They had encountered a species that could not be conquered because humans possessed something the Zephyrians had never understood, which was the ability to unite in the face of extinction. Sandra Walsh led teams that salvaged alien technology from the battlefield while Chris Thompson organized the integration of liberated species into the growing alliance. Humanity had proven that strength came not from domination, but from cooperation between equals. Dr. Carter established the first interspecies research institute using captured Zephyrian science, combined with human innovation and knowledge from their new allies. The victory had opened possibilities that no single species could have achieved alone. Jake Morrison became humanity's first ambassador to the galactic community, while Alex Turner commanded the new multi-species fleet that began liberating other worlds from Zephyrian control. The former prey had become protectors of freedom across the galaxy. The war's end marked the beginning of humanity's expansion into space. But as liberators rather than conquerors, human colonies spread throughout former Zephyrian territory, offering freedom to species that had lived under alien domination for generations. The Zephyrian Empire retreated to its core worlds, where leaders struggled to understand how their perfect military machine had been defeated by creatures they had classified as the weakest species in the galaxy. Their report spoke of humans with the reverence once reserved for natural disasters. Earth had not only survived first contact, but emerged as the center of a new galactic civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect. The species that had been considered easy prey had proven that underestimating humanity came at a price that empires could not afford to pay. The galaxy would never again see humans as weak or helpless, because the universe had learned that beneath their soft exterior lay the hearts of warriors who would fight impossible odds to protect what they loved. Humanity had earned its place among the stars through courage that turned victims into victors and prey into predators.